Thank you. I'm pleased to accept the invitation to speak at the Dominican House of Studies about the possibility of preaching Humanae Vitae, which can be translated as On Human Life, Pope Paul VI's encyclical letter from 1968 dealing with artificial contraception. And I'm taking a very concrete approach. I'm not going to examine the philosophical foundations for the encyclical. I'm going to give you a version of the homily that I have given every year on the Sunday nearest the anniversary of Humanae Vitae, which is July 25th, the Feast of St. James. And also I'd like to relate to you my experience, feedback I've received on account of preaching that. I preached that in this country and even in Switzerland, where I'm working on a doctoral dissertation. And I've preached every year since my diaconate ordination. So as soon as I could get to the pulpit, I have been preaching on this every year. And at the end, I'll be pleased to take your questions. Now, this is certainly a hard topic to preach on, and if you do so, you may very well receive negative feedback. But if you do a good job with it, I think you'll be amazed at the overwhelmingly positive response that you'll receive. That's been my experience. People appreciate your courage, they appreciate a clear teaching, and they appreciate a respectful approach. We're in no position to accuse or condemn, and we wouldn't be likely to win anyone over with such an approach, and so that is to be avoided. And it's hard to talk about because we don't like to talk about sensitive issues, especially sexual ones. And it's much easier to say nothing than to challenge people. And we don't want to be rejected. But shame on us if we don't preach the gospel. And shame on us if we make a preemptive surrender to our fears of a poor reception, which we may not end up getting at all. If you prepare well and you love the people that you're preaching to, the brilliant truth of this teaching will shine through, and people will be enlightened and even overjoyed. That has been my experience. And there is a terrible need to show that this teaching is not dumb, and that there's no reason for Catholics to be embarrassed about this teaching. You can reach people and help people with a good homily on Humanae Vitae. And here's one possibility. Paul VI's encyclical letter, Humanae Vitae, is one of the most misunderstood and controverted teachings of the Church. And it's important for all Catholics at least to understand what the teaching is, who it applies to, and why it is taught. Even if you will never marry or you're beyond childbearing years, this is relevant, because no Catholic should be embarrassed about his faith. If you're embarrassed about your faith, that's a bad situation. And contraception is a real question that comes up in casual conversation. And your choices may not seem very good if people are mocking the teaching. Right? You could either join with them in ridiculing the teaching, but what would that say about you and your faith? Or you could remain silent, sort of silently feeling like an idiot, but of course that's not satisfying. But could you defend the teaching? Could you say, well, okay, wait a minute, now, okay, I know you might not agree, but let's look at who this teaching applies to and why is it taught? Let's try to answer those questions now. First of all, what is the teaching? Humanae Vitae teaches that when husband and wife consummate their marriage, that act must be open to new life. Notice, it applies to married couples. For all others, the teaching is chastity, not prohibition of contraception. For cases of fornication and adultery, the Church does not say, don't use contraception. She says, don't have intercourse outside of marriage. That clarification alone can clear up a fair amount of ignorance, because oftentimes you'll find that an argument framed as a rejection of Humanae Vitae is in fact a more fundamental doubt about the teaching on chastity. And so if that's the case, you should at least make them admit that this is the real problem, something more foundational. So that's what the teaching is. and who it applies to. So why is it taught? The premise of the teaching is that the union between husband and wife is sacred, and that in this sacred action, husband and wife must absolutely give their whole selves to each other, including their fertility, which is not something to be despised, but something to be treasured as an incomparable gift from God. In giving all of themselves, and in bringing forth new life, spouses even imitate God himself, who is creator of new life, and who gives himself totally and unconditionally to us in Jesus, and in the life of the Trinity. To give all of oneself, then, is godly. And not to give all of oneself in such a noble action is ungodly. In other words, the church says that the married couple must go all the way. In fact, the problem with sexual unions, not in marriage, is that they go all the way physically, but not all the way with the mind, with the will, with the heart, with the spirit. There's a physical sharing, but no commitment. You see, husband and wife have committed themselves completely. They've even had the courage to stand up in public and state this before the church and witnesses. Since this is a sacred action given by God, this union must never be cheated of its full potential and glory. It should not be cheated at all by the will or fears of man. Notice, it is the excellence and nobility of sex and the dignity of man that result in this teaching. For instance, there is no teaching on handshakes or the installation of new carpet or the mating of pigs. You see, these worthy activities do not share in the sacred character of the union of husband and wife. But for children of God, this union is not sometimes to be sacred and sometimes for unholy amusement. It is always to be sacred. In the Catholic view, man does not have the authority to redefine or to contravene nature's purpose here, because it is a sacred and divinely intended gift. Permanent good or permanent harm can be done through this action. God's plan is the best for this action. And to those who do not accept this teaching, Catholics could say, well, at least understand the argument. Understand why. And to those who find the premise of sacredness here laughably idealistic, we should say, I hope you can at least wish it could be true for you. Can't you at least wish that your most intimate action was so sacred that it was beyond man's authority to change and to redefine? So that's the teaching, who it applies to, and why it is taught. The teaching itself is rather simple, especially if you compare it to the Trinity or Christ. So why has there been so much controversy? There seem to me to be three obstacles, or at least three. I want to name three. Three crises. The first is the crisis of faith. When John Paul II came to Denver in 1993 for World Youth Day, the USA Today printed a factoid. You know how they have on the front page down in the lower left-hand corner, you'll see a factoid. And they printed there a factoid announcing that 94% of all Catholics believe in God. Okay, well, that's a good start. Now, of course, that makes no sense. If you do not believe in God, you do not have the Catholic faith. This is not optional. And this is obvious to most people. Although it is less obvious, we have the same problem, the same crisis of faith, if we live as what some people call cafeteria Catholics. This is a crisis of faith, because if we do not trust what God reveals about himself and about us, then we are not dealing with faith, but with personal opinion. For instance, if you tell me your name, your address, and your phone number, and I say, well, okay, I'll accept what you say about the address and phone number, but I don't believe what you're saying about your name. Well, I'm not relying on you for that information. There's not a relationship of trust. I'm making a judgment about what you told me. Now, sometimes we should make judgments about what we're told. But when it is God revealing what is true